Hi everyone, my name's Joe. I'm currently a Ph.D. student at Montfort University and welcome to my YouTube channel. So in today's YouTube video, I'm going to be going over how to write an abstract in 4 simple and easy steps. But first of all, we need to know exactly why we use an abstract. Well, the abstract summarises the whole paper in no more than 300 words and no less than about 150 words. And what you're trying to do is you're basically summarising the whole paper into that 300 words. There's 4 things that we really need to focus on when writing an abstract. 1 is the purpose of the study. 2 is the methods we used. 3 is the results and what we found. And 4 should be a brief summary of our conclusions. Now, what is the actual benefit of an abstract? Well, first of all, if you're writing a university assignment, it's going to create that halo effect because it's the first thing you're going to see on the paper. And usually if you have a good abstract, it's going to engage the reader in a lot more and it's going to make them want to read it. So you're more likely to have an overall higher mark. And if you're writing it as a publication, it's really important because generally most people who are reading lots of papers every day, they usually just read the abstract first. And if that isn't good, then they're either going to skip it or just decide not to read that paper. When you're writing an abstract, you want to create it like an hourglass. So I'll just put a picture of there what that is. So with an hourglass, you're starting off broad with the introduction, and as you're going into the methods results section, you're going very specific, and you're keeping it specific to your project. And then we're going back broad again then with our conclusion, because people need to know when they're reading our paper what the advances are and how they can further carry on the research and add on to our study. The way I see an abstract, it's kind of like an advert in a way. It's summarising your whole paper. So if you're able to write this really good with 4 simple steps, you're going to engage readers in a lot more. They're going to want to read the rest of the paper, and that's what we're trying to really do here. Sometimes abstracts can be quite broad, and this is a big issue because we want to make sure when the reader comes away from our paper, or specifically the abstract, they understood what the paper was trying to show. Otherwise, there's no point of it. Here's an abstract that I used as part of my master's thesis. I was looking at different exercise intensities on cancer and seeing if it could lower the growth rate. Now, what I've done here is for you guys is I've separated the abstract into the 4 different sections that we're covering today. But obviously, usually it's just in one paragraph unless told otherwise. Okay, so when it comes to the introduction, there's a few things we need to ask. We need to know what is the purpose of writing this paper and what was the broad area of it. So why did we want to investigate it? And then we need to find then why our purpose of the study fits into the gap of the literature that's not been covered. So acute exercise serum derived from individuals have been shown to reduce cancer cell viability in a cell model. Quite broadly, is exercise can reduce cancer cell growth in a cell model. So that's broad, okay? We've not really gone into anything too specific yet. We just know that there's a linked second sentence and then identify the gap. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm really trying to identify the gap in order to create a purpose for the reason why we're writing this paper. So, however, today it is unclear what the optimal exercise intensity is. So making exercise prescription difficult. You see what I've done here? I've kept it broad and given them full understanding of what the research area is, and then we've come in then with the gap in the literature that needs to be covered, so that then we can finish off with the 3rd sentence. Therefore, this study aimed to compare moderate and high intensity exercise on cancer tumour growth in a cell model. So if we just look back, we've explained what we're studying. Why is the topic important to investigate? Because we said there's not an optimal exercise intensity at the moment. And then what did we know before the study? So as I said, we knew that there was a link between exercise and cancer. And then we've come in with the purpose and how we can further develop on the knowledge of this area. So the methods section is the second longest part and it's the most important, because we need to know as a reader if the writer has actually identified the correct methods to use in order to answer the purpose of this study. 4 questions again you should be asking yourself when writing the method section. What was the method design? What kind of participants you had, or if you were doing in vitro, which I do know, which cell model did you use? 3 is the duration of study. We need to know how long it is, otherwise we can't really appreciate if it's like a nutrition strategy. We need to know, was it just like a one-off acute supplement, or was it chronic? supplementation over a few weeks. We really need to know that because it can change the results. 4, what was the primary measure outcome? Okay, so if we go back to the abstract that I gave, so in the present study, 8 healthy recreational trained volunteers performed 1 hour continuous cycle at moderate intensity, high intensity and no exercise on separate days. So what we've really done here is we've identified the subjects, so we've specified this now, because before we could have just given an example of just 8 people. Well, what were they? Were they obese individuals? Were they highly trained? Because this is all going to change the purpose of our question, so we really need to make sure this is the specific part. So we've got to know who the participants were and why they were in the study. Performed exercise on a bike. So again, that's very specific. We know that they've done exercise, but what type of exercise? Was it aerobic, anaerobic? We've got it there. So continuous cycle, and the 2 different intensities was a moderate. I could have been a bit more specific here. I could have said what percentage of, say, a VO2 max were they training at. I think I did actually do it, but I've taken it out just for this example today. And then high intensity well, because that's the 2 parameters there. We're really strengthening our methods. We're really being specific with what intensities we've used and what participants we've got. So blood samples were then taken immediately post 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour for further analysis. So we're actually showing now at this point what we're going to do with the people who are exercising, because that's great, but we need to know exactly what we're going to do with it. And now we've actually said that, so further analysis included serum derived from blood samples incubated with breast cancer cells and was also used for an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay to analyse interleukin-6 and IL-10. So here we're adding on to why we done it. Just having the people exercise, okay, that's great, but how do you measure the intensity of their exercise and what you're going to do with it to explain the mechanisms, for example? So that's why we really need to make sure we explain what we're doing. Okay, some of the things we don't want to do when we're writing a methods session is excessive details. Now, you don't need to, it's just going to confuse people and it's just too much information, because you got to remember the abstract is just a brief summary. We've got the whole paper to explain in detail, but the main thing you want to highlight is explain the important details. If you're just talking about the questionnaires and stuff and it's related to a human or cell study, it's going to be a complete waste of time because it's irrelevant to the main question of this. Okay, so the results section is probably the most important part of the abstract, because in this part we are identifying if our findings agree or disagree with our current hypothesis. We want to make sure, have we found exactly what we wanted to find is. So the results part is the longest section of this. So we really need to make sure, even though it is our longest section, that we're again only including the specific and most important results in this section. We have a whole paper later on to explain the other results, but you need to make sure it's the ones for the specific question that you started off with. This is because the main reason why people are reading your abstract is for the results section. They want to know if your question, if you can or cannot do something. So for example, people reading the abstract of my study, they want to know if exercise can slow down cancer growth at different intensities. So if I don't include in the results section yes or no, then they're not going to want to read the rest of the paper. Usually you can get away when you're writing an assignment of just including most of the results in your results section, but again, just try and make it as the most important ones. Perceived exertion was significantly higher during the high protocol in comparison with moderate exercise. So this statistic proves that our high intensity exercise was significantly harder than our moderate exercise intensity. So this is just to make sure that anything from this part onwards is valid, because we made sure the 2 exercise intensities were significantly different. Really post 1 hour, 2 hour in the high trials shows significantly lower tumor growth rate in comparison with the moderate control trials. Okay, so this is probably the most important sentence of the thing, because we are initially saying that from our study, we are saying that high intensity exercise can slow down cancer growth in a cell model more than what it can in comparison with moderate type intensity exercise or no exercise at all. So what we've done here in the results section, we've made sure that all of our methods were valid by making sure that there was a difference between the exercise intensities. 2, we've shown that one of the exercise intensities does slow down cancer growth. And then 3, which is another important part, we've explained the mechanisms. We've identified why we might have seen a better outcome with a high intensity exercise. The good thing about this is when you have a good results section, it's easier when you come into the conclusion to have a better take-home message. So the main findings of the study show that a bout of cycling at 75% of VO2 max on a cycle ergometer has a significant effect on reducing tumour growth rate in comparison with moderate and exercise alone. So what we've done here, we've just concluded the first 2 sentences of the results. So the results, we've given the statistics, exactly what they showed, but we're really concluding it in a more broader type sentence and really explaining to the reader what these results show. Because for some people, if they're just reading the results alone, it can be quite confusing and not going to fully understand it. So we're doing the conclusion. You want to make sure you keep it broad, but very specific to your results and actually explain what's happened. So high concentration of IL-6 found in the hydro could explain the findings. So as I mentioned to you, we measured the cytokines as like a mechanism type, say, to identify which of the exercise intensities was going to be the best way for slowing cancer growth in the cell model. And we're able to hopefully kind of glue these 2 different parameters together and say that the cytokines could explain the findings in this study. And in the last part of the conclusion, after we've given the take-home message, we want to allow the reader to have further questions, because this is the most important part. Not one research paper will fully answer the overall question in that topic. And this is really important because we need to identify what future researchers or us as a group could do after the study's been completed. Research never just finishes. It's not like you do one study and that's it. You no longer need it. Research is about finding more stuff, finding newer things, and then adding on to that. How can we better this? And it's constantly in this cycle of that. So when you are writing the conclusion and the take-home message, I think it's always important to write what future research could be done to further add on to this. And this is where partnerships or different researchers get talking to each other to strengthen the studies. So for example, in mine, I've put further researchers need to investigate the molecular mechanisms, so we need a bit more stuff related to the cytokines, and we could also do with a larger sample size. So maybe the methods of the study was okay. Obviously I'm going to think that because it's my own study, but one of the things, in my personal opinion, that was not as good is that we only had 8 people, so next time it would be better to have a larger sample size, such as, 20 or 30 people. But it's just getting the reader to understand the gaps, the limitations, because not one perfect, and we need to know how we can better ourselves all the time. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I've tried to make it as basic as possible and make a step-by-step guide so that everyone who's, whether you're in the first year of university or in the last year of degree, can understand it, and then hopefully you can use that in your university assignments. Again, you can also use this in research papers as well, but again, I'm only a PhD student. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means. It's just I've read a few books, and obviously I've wrote a few dissertations, so hopefully I have somewhat knowledge to share this video. I hope you did all enjoy it, and I'll see you all next time. As well, some of the inspiration I got from making this video is probably from this book here, so How to Write a Scientific Paper. They've got a lovely part on the abstract section, so between this book and a few research papers, which I will link in the description box, really encouraged me to write this or make this video for you guys on YouTube.